Welcome to the 2023 Grad Futures Forum Graduate Student Professional Development Conference hosted by the Graduate School at Princeton University. My name is Eva Kubu and I'm the Associate Dean of Professional Development and Director of Grad Futures. We're so glad you could join us for this fourth year of this annual conference designed to support graduate student futures at Princeton and beyond. To activate the graduate school's priorities for graduate student professional development with the generosity of anonymous graduate alumni donors, Grad Futures launched in fall of 2019. Since that time, there has been an outpouring of support from graduate alumni, the APGA, and Graduate Alumni Giving, and so many other graduate alums who have served as mentors, speakers, advocates, and champions as we continue to expand our efforts. With your help, Grad Futures now serves as Princeton's hub for empowering graduate student futures through a broad spectrum of skills training, mentorship, experiential opportunities, and interdisciplinary exploration. Our graduate alumni are steadfast partners in building out the full professional development ecosystem for our graduate students. To celebrate and thank you for your contributions, we dedicated the finale of the Grad Futures Forum to building connections and community further among our graduate students and graduate alumni. The theme of this year's forum is advancing innovation, equity, and inclusion via professional development. And alumni mentorship really is an exemplification of this theme and this priority. I'd like to take a moment to recognize and thank SPIA alum Drew Harker of 1981, yes? Sorry, we called you out on that. Drew helped us to found the Grad Futures Mentor Program, moving us from, as we say, an analog program in summer of 2019 to a digital plus program in 2020. Drew founded a mentorship program at his undergraduate alma mater, UCSD, and volunteered his guidance and advice to our team as we were really thinking about our priorities for mentorship. He serves, I would like to say, as an honorary Grad Futures team member, spending countless hours gathering feedback from our mentors and mentees. I know many of you have received emails from Drew, I'm quite sure, really helping us to continue assess and refine the program. This panel is now really intended to highlight some of the mentors, having them share their insights, and really expertise around mentorship and best practices. It is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Sonali Majumdar. She's the Assistant Dean for Professional Development. We like to say we stole her away from UVA last spring, right before the Grad Futures Forum of 2022. She co-manages the Alumni Mentorship Program. She'll come to the podium, introduce our panelists, but give Sonali a big round of applause as well for all of her efforts in shaping the program.
Thank you, Eva, for the kind words. And hello, everyone, to the last day of Grad Futures Forum. We've all made it together through a week of professional development. I'm Sonali Majumdar. I'm the Assistant Dean for Professional Development in the Grad Futures team, and I am thrilled to be moderating this Grad Futures Alumni Mentoring Program panel featuring some of our esteemed guest speakers and alumni mentors for today. Just a little bit of context about the Alumni Mentorship Program. Thanks to the alumni mentors, Drew Harker's leadership, the Grad Futures Alumni Mentoring Program provides our graduate students with access to a diverse network of mentors. In partnership with Mentor Collective, the program matches currently enrolled graduate students with graduate alumni mentor based on common academic and professional interests, life challenges, as well as life experiences. Graduate alumni mentors provide psychosocial support and professional development guidance to uncover the hidden curriculum of graduate school, meet the evolving professional development goals of graduate students at different stages of training, and foster overall well-being and holistic development. Now, in its third year, the program has matched close to 150 to 200 pairs of graduate students and alumni each year of its running and administration. We really do thank our graduate alumni mentors, many of whom have served as mentors for over 2 to 3 years and supported more than one, sometimes in some cases 3 to 4 graduate students, and contributed countless hours of their time in mentorship and guidance. We're so glad that some of you could join us in person today, as well as a lot of you are joining us online as well. Thank you so much. The Alumni Mentorship Panel is an opportunity for us to learn and discuss some of the best practices of inclusive mentorship and peer guidance as well as mentorship guidance. We thank our panelists who have consistently served as a mentor for 2 or in most cases 3 years and have offered to share their experiences and lessons learned from their time in the mentorship program. Over the next hour or so, I will pose a few questions to our featured guests here, followed by open Q&A between anyone in the room, and we'll try and take a few questions on Zoom if we have time. Following the panel, I would really invite all of you to join us upstairs in the Frick Atrium for a networking lunch so you can learn more and connect and keep building those connections between each other as well as with the graduate alumni. So with that, without further ado, let me go ahead and start really inviting all of our featured guests on here. Our first panelist is Dr. Andrea Morris. Andrea is currently an assistant dean and the founding director for career and professional development at the Rockefeller University in New York City. Prior to that, Andrea taught and headed an undergraduate neurobiology research lab, studying axon guidance as an associate professor of biology at Haverford College in Pennsylvania. She earned a PhD in Princeton's molecular biology program in 1999 as the first African-American woman in the department to win that PhD. She's also a leader in the nation's efforts to diversify academia and the scientific workforce through her work in science education and training and through serving as an active grant program reviewer for National Institute of Health, or NIH. Andrea has won numerous grants from the NIH throughout her career and has mentored countless students, postdocs, and junior faculty members nationwide, many of whom are from traditionally underrepresented groups in higher education. She also served as secretary of the Association of Princeton Graduate Alumni, or APGA, for several years. She's one of our Grad Futures alumni in residence. Thank you, Andrea, for joining us. Our second panelist is joining us online via Zoom, Dr. Mika Provata-Carlone. I apologize if I did not say this correctly. There she is on the screen for all of you to see her. Mika has been a mentor with the Grad Futures Mentor Collective scheme at Princeton since its creation in 2019, working with graduate students in several departments in the humanities. She is an independent scholar, translator, editorial consultant, and illustrator, and a contributing editor for the literary journal Bookanista. At Princeton, Mika was a recipient of the Stanley Seeger and the G.F. Kostopoulos fellowships and read for an MA and a PhD in comparative literature in the fields of classic, English, French, philosophy, and modern Greek, earning a PhD in the comparative literature field in 2002. Her other studies include art history, drama, scenography, photography, and cinema. She's been the chair of the Princeton Alumni Schools Committee of the UK since 2009. And is currently also the ASC chair for France and for the Netherlands, as well as serving her second term as the PSC chair for select regions in Europe, the US, and Africa. She's a recipient of the S. Barksdale Pennick Jr. 25 Award for her ASC work in 2010, and Alumni Council Award for Service to Princeton, awarded in 2018. She serves on the Advisory Council of the Department of Comparative Literature in Princeton until its dissolution in 2022. Thank you, Mika, for joining us online. Our third panelist is Dr. Joseph, or as he likes to go, Joe Tylka. Joe is a research scientist in Siemens Corporate Technology, a physicist and mechanical engineer by training. Joe's expertise lies in multi-channel signal processing, intelligent control systems, and machine learning. As principal investigator on both internally and government-funded research projects, Joe guides the development and implementation of manufacturing automation applications, leveraging the latest technologies in machine learning, industrial robotics, and edge computing. He received his PhD in Princeton's Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering program in 2019, where his dissertation research focused on virtual navigation of measured 3D sound fields. He is also one of our Grad Futures alumni in residence. Thank you, Joe. And our fourth and final panelist today is Dr. Raghuveer Vinukollu. Raghuveer is the head of Climate Insights and Advisory at Munich Reinsurance America, or Munich Re, based in Princeton. He is passionate advocate for climate adaptation and resiliency, with emphasis on the role of insurance and public-private partnerships in building resilient communities. Raghuveer's expertise in climate resilience is resulted and reflected in the recent articles titled Reimagining Resilience in a Post-Pandemic World and Nature's Remedy, Improving Flood Resilience Through a Community Insurance and Nature-Based Mitigation. He earned PhD in 2011 from the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering in Princeton, and his dissertation was in studying land surface hydrology. Currently, he serves as one of the advisory council members for the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. He also serves as the co-chair for Princeton's Graduate Alumni Annual Giving in the Association of Princeton Graduate Alumni Governing Board, or APGA. Thank you, Raghuveer. I wanted to just take a moment for you to reflect any introductory comments or remarks or thoughts you have before we dive into what mentorship means and such.
I'm always glad to see people willing to come out on a Saturday in the rain, particularly all of the students that are here. I think one of the themes that you'll hear a lot about today is, making the time for your professional development as one of the real keys to success, in addition to the research and all of the other work that you're doing. So my reflection is really appreciation, and I'm excited to talk to everyone and be part of this panel.
Mika?
I just wanted to thank Eva and everyone who has created this program, because I think it's quite invaluable. I wish something like that existed when I was on campus. And it's more than just professional development. It's more than just inviting people with, a longer path to share their little black books or sort of provide practical advice on how to go about defining a career or achieving goals. It's actually creating very special safe spaces to have invaluable and very sort of lively conversations about things that matter to graduate students, about having informal conversations, whether it's about what to do with one's life, or writers that one loves, or questions that one is trying to ask within a PhD program. And it is a very different space from the conversations you're going to have with your peers or the conversations you're going to have with those who teach you. And so that sort of in-between space that only adds, it doesn't supplement, it doesn't supplant or replace any of the other spaces, but it adds that extraordinary dimension of relationships and of growth. I think that's very unique. So big thanks to Eva for that, and for everyone who's been working on that, and the anonymous donors who initially funded it, who happen to be friends of mine. So I'm not going to sort of tell their names, but they know who they are.
Yeah, so thank you all. Thanks for having me here. I think mainly here because, and why I also do the mentoring is I like to talk to grad students, hear what they're wrestling with, and try to, commiserate a little bit and try to support, people who are going through similar things to what I went through. So I'm mainly here to talk with you all. So please ask questions after the panel, and we can chat over lunch also. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, so good morning, or is it good afternoon yet? No, so, okay. So the reflection I have, I would say, echo all the comments that have been made till now. But let me just say that I always feel a sense of gratitude coming back to Princeton. It's just, the journey was not just over those 5 years that I was here, and the journey has continued. The kind of information, the knowledge, the connections that you get at Princeton, it has always been something that I've been thankful about. And so having a program like this, Eva and Sonali, I think this was like, I wish I had this, right? Again, because I think it's a journey after grad school, but also right at the end of the final year. It's kind of like very, there's an anxiety. What's going to happen next? And especially after, at least I had spent 30 years of my life in an academic environment, I was like, how's life going to be? I don't want to go into the academic world. I want to go into the industry, and out of the 40 students that my professor graduated with PhDs, I was the only one who went into the industry, so I was like, who to reach out to? But the alumni were really, really helpful. At least one or two of them, they took a lot of time. So I think this program kind of re-emphasizes that network, the connections that the university gives. So again, a sense of gratitude. Thank you.
That's a really good segue for me to pose my first question. So just want to preface this by something that we mention a lot in the alumni mentoring program during the orientation weeks is in their report called Science of Effective Mentorship. The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine defines mentorship as a professional working alliance in which individuals work together over time to support the personal and professional growth, development, and success of the relational partners through the provision of career and psychosocial support. Sounds really good on paper, right? But I want to pose it to you as, what does mentorship mean for you? And we don't have to go in order. If someone really wants to get at it first, please do. Otherwise, we'll start with Andrea and go with Mika next.
I'll jump in. I think for me, mentorship is really, we've heard it already described about the journey. So I always think about the role that mentors played throughout my education and now career. So I always think of mentorship in terms of whether you're positioned as a mentor or all of the times that you were mentees, and that throughout your career, you will, if you're lucky enough, be in both positions, right? So to be a mentee, we always hear the phrase about lifelong learning. And I think part of mentorship is really the capacity to advise, to learn from, and to, see it as a way to give back and be appreciative of opportunities. So that formal definition, sounds a lot fancier, but I think for me, it's the being in a position to help and to be guided by others, which actually gets harder the further along in your career, right? You're often put in the position to be a mentor, but these types of opportunities, I get to be mentored. So that's what I think of with your first question.
Thank you. Mika?
I think all of us at some point, especially if we've gone into graduate school, we've met people who have made a difference and who've marked us. And I think that experience translates into a gaze. Someone has seen into you something that is worth believing in, something that you can hold on to during a process that is both very, very lonely and very dialectical. Doing a doctorate means that you're very much alone with your mind and your subject, but it also means exchanging views and sharing views and learning with and learning from others. And so to me, mentoring is creating that gaze for a younger generation, if I can, and to the extent that I can. The other thing that I think is important is when you go into the process of a doctorate, very often you get discouraged, or you get the feeling that it starts feeling meaningless. It's too long, there is too much insularity. And yet you go into any kind of PhD, whether it's in the humanities or the sciences, with a sense of enchantment, with a sense of this is the most significant thing. This is something that adds meaning to your life, to everybody else's life. So the other thing that mentoring means for me is trying to help a younger generation hold on to that sense of enchantment, whether they sort of continue with academia or not. That sense of, I was enchanted by something and I made it a part of my life up to the highest degree I could, is something that you will hold on to until the day you die. It's like learning a musical instrument to near professional degree, and you don't become a professional musician, but you always play for the pleasure of it. And so, we learn to think as doctoral students, and we learn the pleasure of thinking, the pleasure of understanding. So being a mentor means helping others keep that sense of enchantment through something that can be grueling and very, very difficult.
Joe?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I found myself thinking about it from both sides, right? How do I think about mentorship as a mentor, and then how do I think about mentorship as a mentee? And I think probably I still have a lot to learn, maybe from my mentees, on sort of how to be a good mentee, right? I think that's also a skill, right? How to navigate the relationship with your mentor and really get effective use out of that relationship. I think I haven't. I mean, for sure, I've had people that have supported me throughout my career, but I think I haven't really figured out how to be a good mentee, let's say. How I like to approach being a mentor, though, and I'd be interested actually to hear if my mentees agree with this, what I try to do, I guess. For me, it's about, I want them to see me as someone who's in their corner, right? Someone who has their back and wants to support them, wants to help them work through their issues, whatever they might be. And that doesn't mean I have all the answers, right? But maybe I have some ideas at least that we can talk about to help them with whatever they're wrestling with. And so, yeah, mainly for me, it's about being someone that can support them in whatever their goals might be. If it's preparing for interviews, transitioning from academia to industry, whatever it is, I will try my best to be, in their corner for that whole journey. Would be interesting to hear if that's how they also see it. But anyways, that's what I strive for.
Raghuveer?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has already been said. So, but I want to pick on a few things that, starting with Andrea, I think you said it's a lifelong learning experience. And then Joe, you put it really well that it's also about learning how can I be, and what do I as a mentee learn from my mentee. And so I think Shannon knows this very well, that I always keep saying it's a two-way street, right? It's learning, it's giving my experience, what I experienced over the journey that after grad school, sharing it in about situations. How do you navigate through some situations? Because again, when you think about it from a corporate world, it's very different from the academic world. So we come up from a very, let's say to some extent, we're very naive when we graduate. How do you navigate with people? So some of those experiences, sharing that. But yeah, it was always, I think, a lot of learning for me in terms of how when I communicate some of my experiences, how does my mentee take it? And then, and what do I learn from that in terms of working with my mentors, right? So there's a lot of the two-way street, I feel. So mentoring is, again, it's equal learning, and it's always the lifelong learning experience, as Andrea puts it.
I love that me talking about lifelong learning. That's one of the themes for how we phrase professional development in Grad Futures. And in that same vein, my next question gets to the part of the journey, right? You talked about two-way street. What are some things that you learned that, organizations like NASM would call best practices, but you are constantly kind of learning from your experience around inclusive mentorship and holistic mentorship, like giving examples like how you might be building trust through getting to know someone better, setting expectations, or supporting their goals. And sometimes that might even take decentering your experiences to understand who they are. And so I'm giving a lot of primers here, but I would love to hear your thoughts on how those have gone for you and what you've learned and would advise other mentors and mentees in the room.
I think it's really about always being a better listener than you think that you are is the best practice that I always think of, especially the first time I'm meeting with a student, a graduate student, or a postdoc, which is a big part of my current role at Rockefeller. It is, I feel like I have all this information, all this knowledge, and I want to, get it into, but I need to take that step back and listen. And so it's always about, what is the context for that particular person at this particular moment? And then how do you help them navigate that? So it's always, my best practice is, like I said, to be a better listener at every occasion that I'm meeting with a student to help navigate that particular meeting and then their longer journey.
Mika?
I think Andrea is absolutely right. Listening is the first thing one has to do. And thinking with the other person. So in some way, taking yourself outside the equation and trying to not sort of speak to someone, but think with someone, trying to understand their story, trying to understand what has led them to the place where they're at, what they're trying to find, and sort of helping them explore things that maybe feel contradictory or feel, too unsettling. And I think, the two-way street is you have to share as much as you listen. So you have to create the sense of they're not the only ones exposing themselves. You're also someone who could bring in the same kind of fragility, the same kind of uncertainty, the same kind of questioning that they may be going through. And so you need to offer both the space for strength, but also the space for them to feel that they're not on their own. It's happened to other graduate students time and time again. So sharing experiences, whether positive or more challenging, I think is something that helps build trust, build that safe space within which they can have those conversations. Being very generous. So things that you've discovered, share them with them. So I tend to have almost preceptorial conversations with my mentees. And so the sense that you can create multiple perspectives for them, the sense that you can sort of make them think, not just from the restricted context of an academic discipline, but from a much broader one. As a comparatist, that's what drew me to comparative literature. I think the sense of enrichment, listening with, all these things are very vital to that conversation.
I mean, I think it's an interesting balance, right? How do you be there to support your mentee, but also not just present yourself as like, I'm the expert, I have all the answers, I've done this before, right? I can tell you what you're doing wrong, right? And that's of course not how I try to approach it, and I don't think that would be very productive. That being said, I do sometimes take the liberty to share my thoughts, share my experience, even if it's not exactly requested. And I guess how I try to sort of mitigate that is, then checking in with the person, right? Like we're having a conversation, they're telling me about what's going on for them, and then maybe I'll share my thoughts about, maybe you could try talking to this person or whatever it is. But then checking in with them and like, is that okay? Is that the kind of feedback you want from me? Is that the kind of relationship you want from here? Or do you just want to tell me what's going on and I should just wait for you to ask me for something, right? And so I think for every mentee that I work with, it's always different, right? Everyone, they have their own style and how they approach the relationship. So I guess I just try to check in with them on the sort of meta level, right? Is this mentorship going the way that you wanted it to go? So I think it's definitely a delicate balance, and it's a negotiation, right? You have to kind of navigate that also on the meta level together. The other thought I had in terms of best practices. Respond to emails and accept meeting invites and let me know when you're not going to make it to the session, right? I think all of us have busy schedules, right? And it's, I think, also a little bit of professional development, let's say, coming out of academia, right? We have, busy calendars, and we're making time, not to put any blame on anyone, of course, but like, respond to emails and accept meeting invites or decline them.
Yeah, thank you for pointing it out. I'm someone who manages the program. That's probably the fun thing that I hear a lot from both sides, mentor and mentees, about just days it takes for someone to respond, or it's just, nature of life has just become that we become so busy that some things just fall out of, and it takes intentionality and time to build that trust and relationship and mentorship, and part of the professional development. How do we organize and manage your time in something like this? Raghuveer.
Yeah, I think a lot has been said again, but I really like the point of listening, and that really helps for me, at least in the first few meetings with my mentees, not just with the Princeton, but also outside, is trying to understand what are they looking for, and trying to some extent read their mind. It's like, because it's also important to understand where are they coming from. So what helped was, at least in the first few meetings, it was always about a structured meeting, and kind of say, let's put some questions together, say, what are you looking for? And that listening really helped. And then Mika, you put a very important point together. It's just that, listen, you're not the only one who's going through this. We've all gone through this. We've had experiences. We have had situations that we have gone through. And over time, sharing those experiences, not just that has happened in the past, but while it's happening too, right? So something happened in the last 1-2 weeks, I would generally bring it up sometimes and share it, and it kind of gives them that perspective. But and I expect the same from the mentees as well, right? And that comes over time. It's the building the trust, and that happens when you try to understand what they're looking for, and it's not a 1 month, 2 months, or 6 month journey. It's much more than that. Can't emphasize more on what Joe you said. I think it's really important that not just from an email perspective, absolutely that's important, but I think again it goes back to that two-way street. It's not, we are willing to spend that time, share that experiences, but the reciprocation is absolutely required. It's up to you how you want to drive it, and that's the same thing I've again learned from my mentees, and saying, okay, what have they done, and what is there something that I shouldn't be doing as me being a mentee? So I think it's a learning experience that way.
Can I maybe comment on that
please
one? Because I wrestle with this one. To be honest, I don't like to put it all on the mentee, that it's you have to drive it, you have to like come to me with exactly the plan of what you want to get out of it. Like from my perspective, you might not know how to be a mentee, right? This is perhaps your first time as a mentee. I don't think it's necessarily reasonable to say, come to me with your plan and then I'll help you execute it. I think we can be a little more flexible and say, let's talk about how should we approach this mentorship, because you might not know how to do it. I don't know how to do it, but we can try to figure something out that works together, right? And so I think because I think when it comes to questions of like what's the best practice, right? I think the standard answer is like, come in with a plan, right? Come in with some clear milestones and goals and like, I want to have such and such job, or I want to have this many networking events or whatever it is, right? And who has time to make that plan? I don't. I've never done that. And I wouldn't expect that of my mentees either. Would be great, would make it much easier, right? Then we just execute the plan. But I also don't think it's really reasonable to put that all on the mentee, that just come into the plan and I don't have to do anything and I can just help you execute it. So I think there's some gray zone there, not to just contradict what you said, but I think like it's...
No, this is an important nuance
tricky.
though. Like this is something that even in our conversations with mentees, we discuss about this tricky balance of having structure and plan versus, and I actually I can't remember if it was Bonnie or Natalie, we were talking about in the orientation, and he said like one of the first times we had this conversation, it just felt like so stressful that I needed to get something to get out of this conversation, and the minute my mentor and mentee, they both dropped that and just had a normal conversation without an agenda, things started moving better, and especially if we try our best to match people with shared lived experiences and professional backgrounds, but sometimes it's not exactly the fit in the square peg, right? And so we'll have to kind of build that, and goes into all sorts of relationship building that context first, and that trust, where you can even give that sort of information about what you're looking for. Yeah.
And Joe, for the record, I didn't feel that you contradicted me at all.
Mentors are so polite to each other. I just wanted to jump in on a point that, and I'll confess I am the mentor that can sometimes be very slow to respond. And I, just to put in that plug of it's okay to reach back out and get to the top of the inbox again. And generally speaking, will be more grateful than annoyed. And so I think there's always this moment, I reached out and I didn't hear, and what do we do? Or maybe, they're not gonna respond. So I think you can feel some ownership in kind of trying to keep that contact going, and just recognizing that it's not you, it's us sometimes. But I think it's a good reminder that the time and the people reaching out to make that connection is the start of something pretty great. So
I want to, before you go, Joe, I want to give a moment because Mika's raising her hand for a while. And so, yeah. Mika?
Sorry, I was just trying to think about plans. And I think there is a master plan to mentoring, and that is being a stepping stone. So what we are stepping stones. And because someone starting on a doctoral process is, fundamentally thinking, how do I leap? How do I make this extraordinary leap of faith between point zero and the end all and be all? So we're stepping stones, and that also means creating a sense of perspective and creating a sense of refocusing, because very often when I think the experience we can share is how to look at things with a critical distance, as well as the empathy and the proximity to the event itself. Very often I have conversations with mentees who feel either sort of frustrated or terrified or anxious about something that, with me being, 21 years out of the graduate process, I know how to approach very differently and look, the relative magnitude that has changed in terms of what these things mean in the long sort of scheme of things. So the plan, I think, of a mentor is, how can you be the stepping stone for someone? And how can you understand their perspective so you can add to that broader, larger, more helpful and constructive and liberating perspective that you've acquired over time? I think if that's in the background, the agenda falls into place, and it has to be a dynamic agenda. So every time it evolves and grows and transforms and sort of mutates into different things. I'm not sure how helpful this is, but that's how I've been looking at things. And
Okay. Yeah, I think I was thinking about what Andrea, you were saying about, feel free to also send us a reminder or whatever, and the stress that you were mentioning also about the first conversation. I mean, from my perspective, right, we mentors, right, we signed up for this. We've basically made a commitment. Okay, it's not exactly like a blood oath, but we've made a commitment to be there, to support our mentees, right? And I think you should, as a default assumption, assume that we want to help, right? And yes, assume that you're allowed to bug us and say, hey, I haven't heard back from you in a while, whatever it is. And basically, you should feel entitled to ask, right? And if it's becoming too much for our schedules or whatever, right, we will tell you. Ideally, we will tell you that that we can't support meeting twice a week or whatever it is, right? So I think you should feel entitled to ask, make your wishes known, and then trust that we will give you honest feedback if we can't support that.
So I had a separate question about challenges, but I love how this conversation kind of steered in through the challenges anyways. Any of you want to point out any sort of other challenges that didn't come up in the conversation that you may not have anticipated through your time in the mentorship program? If not, I have a lineup of questions still lined up and we can move on to, yeah, Andrea.
I'm going to throw something sort of bigger out to that question, and it's the role of being a mentor in your career, and particularly within academia. How do you manage all of your other responsibilities and committing to and always prioritizing being a good mentor? Where does that fit into sort of your promotion and advancement, right? So within academia, there can be this tension about, the time you're mentoring versus the time you're doing all of the other things. So in thinking about this panel, that was one of the challenges. I remember feeling very often when I was a faculty member, and now in sort of preparing a lot of graduate students and postdocs to themselves be faculty members someday, and also careers beyond the bench, as we say at my institution. It's, the demands on your time and your desire to be an effective mentor can often be at odds. So how do you navigate that as part of your own career journey? So it's not so much challenges specific to this mentorship program, which is phenomenal, but I think the bigger challenge of being a mentor throughout your career, and how do you, put the time in, but also in some ways demand the value that your mentorship adds to an institution or a company and so forth. Because those of us who are committed to do that, we will find a way and we'll do it regardless, but there is this juggling act and balance that is difficult to manage.
Maybe just to comment on that, I think that problem doesn't go away. I was just talking about this with some colleagues. not in terms of like mentorship, but just in terms of like our day-to-day work versus like career advancement, right? And basically what the conclusion we came to is, right, like all of our daily business, all of our like on the ground incentives, what we're supposed to do every day, there's no time set aside for, and also talk to a mentor, and also like, you know, read the latest research or whatever. It's, you know, do your work, do your projects, right? And that's always going to be the case, I think. Like it's, at the end of the day, it's going to be on you to set aside time for that sort of professional development or lifelong learning kind of stuff, and preparing yourself for your next career moves. And I think it's on both sides, right? It's also finding time to be a mentor or finding time to be a mentee. You have to make time for it. And yeah, that doesn't go away even once if you're out of academia.
Yeah, and this is something that comes up in a lot of our discussion with mentees as well, that and in academia as well, right? Like as a faculty or someone who's aspiring to be, the burden of trying to be that one person who is everything for a mentee is too much. And so really approaching mentorship in a sort of community fashion and surrounding yourself with mentors, and hopefully the role of a mentor also being a connector and a conduit for other connections is one approach, which kind of brings me to my final question before we bring some time open for open Q&A, is that becomes really challenging, especially in your work as mentor in uncovering hidden curriculum, supporting them psychosocially, giving career and professional development guidance. For mentees who are, say, underrepresented or minoritized in their fields and don't have representation or role models to look for, and if you find yourself where you don't have shared lived experiences with someone, how do you still kind of approach inclusive mentorship?
I think the only way to approach the question is to assume a basic common humanity, and to think that listening to someone's story and trying to understand what the challenges of that story and what the closed doors of that story have been, you need to believe that there can be understanding and that there can be empathy, and therefore that there can be a discovery of a way to create a bridge for them, create a sense of transcendence for them, and create a sense of connections for them. And above all, create a sense that instead of feeling the marginalization, they need to feel the participation. So the very gesture of doing away with a sense you're included because you were excluded, but instead assuming they are there. End of the discussion. So that sense of doing away with the premise that someone can be excluded and making them feel that it's the most natural thing in the world for all of us to be part of a human community that connects, communicates, shares, and adds to. I think that's the most fundamental thing. And I do quite a lot of schools outreach as an alumni schools committee chair. And I found that if you speak to students precisely from that point of view of you've always been part of, it breaks down the barriers because it gives them the sense of, I don't always need to explain why. I can now find a way to be exactly what I want to be and exactly as strong as I want to be.
Yeah, I think, just a couple of experiences at work itself. It's not, I don't know much about mentoring from that perspective, but I also feel that for the people who I've talked with, I like to, again, the major part of it is listening to their perspective and trying to, sometimes even as a manager, trying to put myself in that perspective and seeing is there any messages that I am sending within the people that I interact with, and is there any messages that are being, again, these are implicit, right? So you have to notice this very clearly. And a lot of it, I didn't learn till I talked with a couple of them, right? So it was a lot about getting their perspective and where they're coming from. A lot of it, again, comes with building trust over time that they could share with the details of where, what experiences they have. Part of it is, of course, a lot of it is experiences, but small part of it is also their perspective, maybe even kind of an implicit bias, but there is bias also everywhere else. So again, these are all things that have to be experienced in the role, and just try to see what kind of, how can I help, and not just giving feedback. Sometimes it needed handholding, or working with them together, specifically with very specific goals. Yeah, it was quite a learning experience.
I mean, I think I don't know that I see myself as having much insight on this topic, but I think maybe the best I can offer, or like the best approach that I've come up with so far, is to just try to check in with my mentees, right? Is this relationship going the way that you wanted it to? Are you getting what you need from me? Are you getting out of this mentorship what you were hoping for? Is there anything I can do differently? And just trying to invite that honest feedback, and make space for that in our mentoring relationship. And because I also want to learn, right, what I could do differently or do better. So, but I think that's about the best I've come up with. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. Andrea?
Everything was very well said. What I would add to that is, you can think about your role as being a sponsor for your mentees, right? So it's those moments when you're together with them and you're building the trust and the plans and supporting their advancement. But there are opportunities when they're not in the room, when you're in other spaces, you can advocate for your mentees, and you can, suggest, hey, I know this great graduate student that her work is exploding. You should get her on this conference list now. So I think part of being inclusive can be in that sponsor's role, and think about what your mentees might need that you didn't necessarily have or offer in one instance, but you can certainly advocate for them when they're not around. And I think that sort of sponsorship goes such a long way for the students in the short term and also in the long term. That, that's one thing that I like to think about as I'm mentoring. Am I also being a sponsor for my mentees?
Thank you. Interest of time, I think we'll wrap and keep the open Q&A for the networking lunch. But I recognize that Mika is not with us in person, so if anyone in the room has a question for Mika, please pose them now. And for the rest of us, we could go upstairs, have lunch, and do the Q&A more intimately. Robin.
Yeah, so I want to ask. So I'm interested in the perspective of being a mentor. So some context. So I'm doing some pro bono as well as like paid consultation service for people from Taiwan to learn about like rules in adapting to these white collar higher education, or like this professional settings, like hidden rules. So I'm kind of curious, is like in the first few meetings, how do I as a mentor or a consultant to ask unique questions that extract their context, but also provide like materials so that there might be some sort of shining a different color of light to their experiences.
Mika, did you hear that?
Yes. I'm not quite sure how the question is different from what we've been discussing all this while, in the sense that you always start a conversation going in slightly blind. You don't know who the other person is. You don't know what they've been through, what they're looking for. So I think the very first thing you need to do is try and ask open-ended questions and see if you can add to those questions each time a very tiny sort of piece of perspective that is your own, so that you can see whether that leads to a greater understanding of what they feel they still lack, they feel they would like to aspire to, they feel that they would like to dream about. So you need to sort of have searching questions at the back of your mind, and always be flexible enough to modulate those searching questions every time you get a response, so that you build on their contribution to the conversation. I'm not sure whether that helps, because it seems to me that you're looking for a very specific set of guidelines for what you're doing, which is very strictly sort of professional in nature, rather than more sort of growth oriented, such as the Grad Future scheme is, because it works with current graduate students, so people who are still in a very formative stage, in a very transformative stage, rather than people who have gone through the training process and are looking at entering a sort of professional space. Have I understood you right?
Yeah, I think I would say like the people I'm working with tend to be kind of thinking about either career change or immigrating. So there is some sort of, I would say, like a lot of transformative opportunity there as well.
So if you're working with people who are considering a career space change, I think what you should do is, and this is something I do with graduate students, and something that actually helped me. And the paradigm I'll give is my own experience. When I was in the writing stage of my doctorate, I actually panicked. And I thought, this is going on for too long. I'm writing and writing and writing. I'm stuck in libraries. I'm looking at manuscripts. I'm doing all this research. Where is it going to go? Is this a dead end? And I went to a headhunter's office. And they were people who were hiring for something that had absolutely nothing to do with what I was doing. They were hiring for the City here in London, so finance careers. And just the process of putting myself through a test, is there another option, just made me go back to writing my doctorate with absolute sheer delight, just because I knew there was an alternative. So when people are exploring career changes, I think what you need to do is tell them, okay, let's brainstorm and think of things that you haven't thought about. So actually give them the freedom to be very experimental, to almost be reckless in an imaginary sort of way, and trying to think of what is it that's the craziest thing I might want to do. The moment they're going to take it out of the system, they will test the reality of it, and they will test how desirable that kind of radical change is for them. And you will see that that confirms current positions or helps them find the strength to stop something that may be sterile for them and look for what is actually truly rewarding and meaningful, or just practically desirable. So brainstorming is what you want to look at. You want them to feel that it's all right to look at things that are not the expected things for them, are not the ones that they've been prepared for, are not the ones that everybody else is assuming that they should be doing. So a lot of free thinking and a lot of brainstorming without triaging responses, without censoring responses.
Thank you so much, Mika.
At this point, like to invite Eva Kubu to please come in and give some closing remarks and thank our featured panelists.
Yes. Let's give all of our panelists a round of applause. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, for sharing your time, and most of all, for sharing your care. This is really what it's about, building that care, a caring community, and a community that, again, it's very reciprocal. What the nature of mentorship is all about is really building those authentic and genuine relationships. We have more than 20 graduate alum mentors who have been mentoring in the program for multiple years, or who have been mentoring multiple mentees. I'd like to just acknowledge them. Each one will receive a small token of appreciation from the graduate school. And Mika, we will be sure to mail yours as well. But I want to acknowledge that each of the panelists here have been part of that community of care, have been part of the mentorship program, mentoring multiple mentees and for multiple years. We have this token of appreciation is the New Princeton Companion. It's a book that really chronicles the history of Princeton, but also specifically mentions the role of alumni in building the university, in really, again, giving back in myriad ways to really help establish graduate student professional development and many, many other programs. The book was written by a Princeton alum, Robert Durkee, who was also the vice president and secretary of the university. So we hope you enjoy it, and there's a huge chapter on the graduate college. I learned so much about graduate school and graduate college through the book. Thank you. We invite everyone to come upstairs as well for the lunch where the networking and the great conversations can continue. Big round of applause again. Thank you.